Hi, everyone. It's so good to see you or for you to see me. It's been a while. I'm Miss Raquel. I'm going to be teaching the lesson for today. We're continuing our lessons on the armor of God. And today's lesson is first things first. Keep that in your mind. First things first. I'm going to read our scripture for today, Ephesians 6:14. It says, "Stand therefore, having girded your waist with truth, having put on the breastplate of righteousness." We just used our pivot trait. Our pivot trait for today is righteousness. That means upright without guilt or sin. And our pivot point for today is I need God's righteousness, not mine. We're going to find out what that means as we go on with our lesson. So keep that pivot point in your mind. I need God's righteousness, not mine. And another verse that we have, I'm going to read. It's our pivot verse for today. It is Philippians 1, verse 11. And it says, "Being filled with the fruits of righteousness which are by Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God." I read that out of the New King James Version. In the New International Version says, "Filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ." So it makes it a little easier for us to understand. We said our pivot point was I need God's righteousness, not mine. And then we read that verse, Philippians 1:11, and it says righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ. So that kind of gives us an idea of where righteousness should come from, not ourselves, but Jesus. When we talk about the breastplate of righteousness, like in Ephesians 6:14, that's part of the armor of God. We're talking about the breastplate of righteousness. And righteousness, it must be a pretty important thing to when you think about all those important parts of the body being protected by it. So the breastplate will cover your chest and your torso area. It will cover underneath your underneath your chest, underneath your skin is very valuable body parts like your heart, your lungs are in your torso, your stomach. Very vital organs are right in this area, and that's where the breastplate of righteousness would cover all those important areas. So when we talk about putting on the whole armor of God, that makes you think it must be protecting a lot of important things if we want to have our breastplate as righteousness. Righteousness is the character of being right or just. That's like us doing right things. However, us doing right things to God really isn't what the breastplate is about. I know you're thinking, well, what is it about then? You just said it's about doing right things, but then you said that's not really what it's about. I have another scripture for us to read, Isaiah 64, verse 6. And I'm going to turn to that so I can read it for everyone. Isaiah 64, chapter 64, verse 6. It says, "But we are all like an unclean thing, and all our righteousnesses are like filthy rags." Did you hear that? Like filthy rags. Filthy, dirty, unclean. That's what it's like when we depend on our righteousness, on our doing the right thing to be right with God. That's what our righteousness is like to God. Now, I read another scripture at the beginning of our lesson. It was Philippians 1, chapter 1, verse 11. And it talked about where righteousness should come from. And I hope you remember. Think about it. We can't first try to do right things. The first part is God's righteousness. First, we need God's righteousness. Then, because Jesus is in our hearts, we can truly live pure, right lives. I'm also going to read 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21. And I'm almost there. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21 says, "For he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him." And when it says "for he made him," it's talking about God made Jesus, who was perfect, who did not do any kind of sin. Jesus became sin for us so that we could take his righteousness, his pureness that he had. Jesus is God's righteousness. He died for us, and when we receive Jesus into our heart, we receive God's righteousness in our lives. Then and only then can we truly live rightly. Now, I think I give you more clues, but I hope you remember, like I said, where righteousness should come from. I'm going to read Philippians chapter 1, verse 11 again. Remember, it says, "Being filled with the fruits of righteousness, which are by Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God." There it is again. Which are by Jesus Christ. From Jesus Christ. Here we see that the fruit of righteousness, those right things we do, can only come by Jesus. After we received him in our heart, God's righteousness had to come first, and then we can demonstrate the fruit of this righteousness by living rightly. God's righteousness makes us upright without guilt or sin. Aren't you glad? Here's our pivot point again. I need God's righteousness, not mine. There it is again. The way to protect your heart is with the breastplate of righteousness, God's righteousness. Only God's righteousness can protect our heart from the enemy. And here's our pivot point again. I hope you can say it with me this time. I need God's righteousness, not mine. I want you to say that over and over and over again until it gets in your head and it gets in your heart. We need God's righteousness, not ours. I am going to show a video of someone who thinks that their righteousness is what makes them right with God. Let's see what they have to say. Oh God, I thank you that I'm not like these sinners. I thank you. See my actions, oh God. See my righteousness. All the right things I do, and be impressed. Oh my. This food sure does look tasty. But far be it from me to eat, for I am fasting. Oh God, look at my sad face and see my righteous fasting. That's what your law says, that I should fast. Look, God, I am fasting. And did you see, God? I'm praying. Look at me. Look at the righteousness. You see, God, I'm praying. Your law tells me also. Look at this, some sanitizer. Your law says to keep my hands clean, oh God. So watch. I fast, I pray. I keep my hands clean. I know you're impressed now, God. Oh, you out there, I see you. You didn't clean and wash before you came to class today, did you? So I'm going to give this for you. Here's some money so you can go get some clean clothes. Look, God, I'm giving to the poor. I'm giving to the poor. I fast, I pray, wash. I give to the poor. Talk about righteous. I've got it all together. Fast, pray, wash, and help the poor like me. You know what the law says. Watch me. I'm righteous and perfect. Oh, I don't even know what to say about that person. That person was long time ago in the early days called a Pharisee. A Pharisee was a person who was so concerned with the law of God that they placed emphasis on correct